Today is August 18th, 2025, and this is William Michael, the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. This past weekend, we had our annual lay Dominican retreat here in Charlotte, where the two different groups get together for a time of prayer and worship and study. We have visiting Dominican friars provide a number of conferences that provide lots to think about and talk about. It's obviously a time for the lay Dominican community to come together, spend a couple of days together, get to know each other, develop relationships, and think about our lives, examine ourselves in light of Dominican teaching, and ask how we can become more perfect in the Dominican way. For me, it meant a bunch of discussions privately about the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, the work we're doing, the mission of what we're doing, and so on. And it was good for me because as I answered questions that people had and discussed things, I started to see a few themes that I realize I need to make more explicit and communicate more effectively moving forward. And so I'd like to share a couple of those issues because they relate to the mission of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. You know, what am I doing in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy? I think I take it for granted that Catholics understand what I'm doing. And as I talk to them, I realize they really have no idea what I'm doing in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy or where it came from. So I'd like to share my thoughts on the good that I'm trying to do in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. First, to back up, before I started the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, I was a private school classics teacher. I was in the midst of my conversion to Catholicism. I converted in 2005, and at that time, I was teaching, as I said, in a private school as the upper school classics teacher, and it was not a Catholic school. So I was going through my conversion experience, the process of conversion, while I was teaching in a non-Catholic school. I taught classics, I taught rhetoric and debate, logic, Latin, history, and so on. So I was very comfortable because I could talk about Catholic topics and theological dilemmas and things like that. And there was a context for those discussions. But I wasn't happy as I converted. I wasn't happy working in a non-Catholic school. The other thing that concerned me, maybe even more important than that, was that I was teaching in an expensive private school, and I was teaching the best, the brightest, and the most beautiful students in the Charlotte area, which is a wealthy area to begin with. And I used to think to myself, you know, if you take me out of these kids' lives, they'll all still be okay because they have everything. They're beautiful kids. They come from great families. They're wealthy. They're Christian kids. Most of them have their whole life already set for them through their family connections and so on. These kids are very well off. Tuition at the school, day school tuition was around $20,000. And I used to just think about that. And I thought, am I really where I should be, serving these students who already have so much, when I know that there are many more students, many more Christian students, Catholic students, who have real needs, and they're not being helped. And so as I converted to Catholicism and settled into the Catholic Church, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to get involved in Catholic education, explicitly Catholic education, but I didn't want to help the rich kids. I was concerned about the kids who didn't have much. I was thinking about saints like John Bosco and the type of ministry he did, thinking of the early Jesuits and how they ministered so generously to children in need of education. And I said to myself at the time, this was around 2007, before I actually founded the Academy, I'd like to get into private education. I'd like to get out of this private school environment and work as a tutor. And I'd specifically like to focus on Catholic education, and I'd like to make it affordable so that any student could have access to a Catholic education. As I thought about the Catholic schools, I realized that my background as a classicist, my teaching of the classical liberal arts, philosophy, and so on, really didn't have a place in the Catholic school curriculum. I didn't want to work in the modern Catholic high schools for a number of reasons. First, as I said, because my content really doesn't belong in a modern Catholic high school. And secondly, I would just be working with the kids who can afford to pay high tuition again. I'd be back in a similar situation. And I said, I know that there are so many kids in the Catholic Church who don't attend Catholic schools for a number of different reasons. And these kids most of them are either being homeschooled by parents who are trying to give them a Catholic education, or they're being sent to non-Catholic private schools, or they're being sent to public schools. And as I thought about it, I just sort of shook my head thinking, there's no way that can be good. There's no way that should be the set of options for Catholic children. You either go to the expensive Catholic private school, or you homeschool, or you go to a non-Catholic private school, or you go to the public school. That's a really crummy set of options. And so I reached out to a group of homeschooling families in the Charlotte area, and I told them who I was and what I wanted to do. And it didn't take long before this tutoring activity started to grow and grow and grow and spread. And so what I did, seeing it developing and seeing it gaining traction in the Charlotte area, I contacted the bishop's office and I asked if I could speak with the bishop or speak with someone in the diocese, because I wanted to run my plans past them and at least know that I made it known what I wanted to do and sought their counsel and hopefully could pursue it with the knowledge that I had the blessing of the leaders of our diocese. And so I received a response from the bishop at that time, and I had 2 appointments set up with the vicar of education in our diocese, and I just laid everything out, what my thoughts were, what my ideas and goals were, what I wanted to do, that I wanted to start tutoring. And I was surprised to find that the vicar of education that I met with was not only supportive, but he encouraged me to consider starting my own independent schools. And while that wasn't my intention, I was very appreciative of the support that I was given. And so I went into the founding of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy formally on January 1st, 2008, and began meeting with a number of students, a number of homeschool children in the Charlotte area, literally going to their house and getting them started, introducing them to the classical liberal arts curriculum, talking about philosophy and the humanities, helping them even with catechism studies and things like that, really just introducing the parents and the children to some very different studies. And as I got started, word started to spread, and there were information meetings organized, and we would have over 50 families show up at these meetings, and started to get a little overwhelming. And these families that I was working with also began to share information with their relatives and friends in other places, other states even. And I started to get emails and phone calls from their relatives and friends asking if they could somehow join in these studies. And the answer was no at that time. I can't do anything for anyone in Michigan or Florida or Texas. So what happened was I started putting materials together and posting them online and allowing anyone who wanted to study them to do so. And I was tutoring the local kids and posting lessons and content online. And then I was simultaneously learning how to do some basic website stuff, how to develop and post quizzes, how to collect quiz grades and results. And so slowly a website developed. And that's how the CLEA started online. It was never planned. I really had no idea what I was going to do. Technology was changing rapidly. And anyway, the CLEA was established as an online study program and then continued to grow so quickly online that I had to devote my attention to it full time. We had 1,000 students enrolled by the end of the first year. So the Classical Liberal Arts Academy was established, but what was significant about it was that my concern was that it would be Catholic in identity, it would be classical in its content and method, but that it would also be affordable. So students who couldn't afford to attend Catholic schools would be able to have a Catholic education, have a great Catholic education, one that actually is a classical liberal arts education. So that's what I was thinking about as I started the academy. I had those goals really clear in mind because of my experience. I wanted to help students who couldn't be sent to Catholic schools. I wanted to give them the access to an affordable education, a classical education, high quality education. And that's what the Classical Liberal Arts Academy was for. Now, you may not know this, but I encourage you to search, do a Google search and search for CARA Church Statistics. By CARA, it's just a abbreviation CARA. CARA Church Statistics. And it'll take you to a page hosted by Georgetown University where statistics are collected in America for the Catholic Church. And this is a Catholic data project. But these statistics are collected with all kinds of important data for sacraments in the church, school population, all sorts of information about what's going on in the Catholic Church and in Catholic culture in America. And there's lots of interesting things to note because it has data collected from 1960 through 2024. It's pretty up to date and it's pretty extensive, going over a period of over 60 years. If you look through that data, you'll find a lot of interesting points to reflect on. And one of them that concerns me the most is the number of students enrolled in Catholic elementary schools. If you look at the number of students enrolled in Catholic elementary schools, and if you give me just a second here, I'm going to pull it up on my own computer. Just a second, sorry about that. So I can look at these numbers because I have the spreadsheet right in front of me. If we look at the number of children in Catholic elementary schools, students in Catholic elementary schools, in 2024, the number was 1.1 million. and this is in America. The number of students in Catholic elementary schools, 1.1 million. Now that may sound like a lot, 1.1 million students in Catholic schools. That's good to know, but there's a problem with this number. Remember that an elementary school extends from, let's say, grades K through 5 or 6. So we're talking 6 different grade levels, 6 different birth years. So we've got kids born over a span of 6 years. And let's round this number up to 1.2 million. We've got 1.2 million students enrolled in Catholic schools, but it's divided by 6 different birth years. So that comes out to around 200,000 students per grade level. So in American Catholic schools, we have 200,000 first graders born one year, 200,000 second graders born the previous year, 200,000 third graders born the previous year, and so on. Keep that number in mind, 200,000 students per birth year. Why is that important? Well, if we take the number of students in a birth year, we can compare that number to the number of infant baptisms. And we can see how the number of infant baptisms in a given year relates to the number of grade level students. And we can actually compare it, so we can look 6 years, 7 years, 8 years later to when those baptized children would be school age. And that allows us to get at least an estimate, very, very rough, an estimate of the relationship between the number of children baptized, the number of infants baptized in the church in a given year, and the number of students in Catholic schools of that same birth year. So let me just grab some numbers. Looking at the number of students in Catholic elementary schools, and I rounded it up to 1.2 million because we're working with 6 grade levels, so it divided evenly. But in 2024, there were 1.1 million, 1.2 million students in Catholic elementary schools. So let's subtract between, let's say if a kid was in 6th grade, he would have been born 12 years earlier, so 2012. So starting in 2012, if we go back, we have data for 2015, so we can start there. In 2015, how many infants were baptized? The number was close to 700,000. 700,000 infant baptisms in 2015, and 9 years later, actually, 9 years later, the number of grade school children of that birth year would have been around 200,000. So only 200,000 out of 700,000 children were in Catholic schools. And the reason why I say this is a very rough estimate is because we don't know that all the children in those Catholic schools are actually Catholic children. Are they baptized children? I don't know that. But the number of infant baptisms in a year was 700,000. And the number of, or the average number of students in a grade level of a certain birth year in Catholic elementary schools was only 200,000. So 2/7 of the children are in Catholic schools. 2/7 of the children are in Catholic schools. That's 29%. So let's round it up to 30%. So 30%, and again, this is all very rough. Please don't hold these numbers too strictly. But speaking generally, with estimated numbers, rounded numbers, 30% of the baptized children, and we're talking about Catholic baptisms, 30% of the Catholic children end up in Catholic schools. 30%. That means 70% of the baptized children are not in Catholic schools. 70% of the children baptized in the Catholic Church are not in Catholic schools. That's the number that concerns me. What are we doing for the education of the 70% of children baptized in the church when it's time for them to go to school? 70%. 70% of the baptized children in the Catholic Church do not go to Catholic schools. So before we start talking about all the problems with kids leaving the church and things like that, let's acknowledge this reality. Children are not being educated in the Catholic faith and then choosing to fall away. They're not simply leaving after being educated in the Catholic faith. 70% of the children don't go to Catholic schools, so they either need to be homeschooled by Catholic parents, which thankfully some are, or they're going to non-Catholic private schools, or they're going to public schools. So before we start yelling at these kids for quote-unquote leaving the church at age 18, let's acknowledge the reality that 70% of them are not even going to Catholic schools. Maybe this is a bigger part of the problem with Catholic population and children making decisions to leave the church. But here's another. Let's look at another number. Let's start with 2015. Looking at baptism of infants, we had around 700,000. Let me actually back up a few more years to 2010. The number of baptisms was 800,000. 2010, keep this number in mind, 800,000 infants baptized in the church. 800,000 infants baptized. The argument is that lots of adults are leaving the Catholic Church. But there's a bigger problem. 800,000 baptisms. Of those 800,000 baptized infants, only 600,000 receive confirmation. So 200,000 of them are lost by confirmation. A quarter of the baptized children are missing by the time they should be receiving confirmation. First communions the numbers are pretty good. 806,000 baptized in 2010. If we go, let's say 10 years later, I don't want to go to 2020 because of the pandemic, but let's just stay in 2010. In the same year when 800,000 were baptized, 800,000 received First Communion. 5 years later, 727,000 received First Communion. So things are okay between baptism and First Communion, but it's actually between First Communion and confirmation that several 100,000 children disappear. It's not when they become adults. It's when they're school-aged. 200,000 don't show up for confirmation. 70% of those baptized children don't go to Catholic schools. A quarter of them don't make it to confirmation. These are the things that should concern us. Now, I would like to suggest that one of the reasons why so many are not making confirmation is because they're not even getting a Catholic education. 70% of the baptized infants are not attending Catholic schools. I would like to suggest, I think it's pretty reasonable to suggest that that is likely a significant influence on that number of confirmations. 70% of the children are not attending Catholic schools. 200,000, 25% of the baptized children are out of the picture by confirmation. 70% of the children are not receiving Catholic education or are not attending Catholic schools. So when we look at this, we have to ask, well, why is this? Why are children who are being baptized in the Catholic Church, their parents are bringing them to the church for baptism, and most of them are making First Communion. So they're not just disappearing. The numbers stay fairly the same between baptism and First Communion, but it's from First Communion to confirmation that they begin to disappear. I'd like to argue that it's because of this situation in education. And we have to ask, well, why are children not attending Catholic schools? And the obvious reason for most of us is that it's just not affordable for most Catholic families. The model that Catholic schools operate with is an expensive model on the tuition side of things. It's not designed to be affordable. It's not designed to serve all of the children. It's not even possible for it to serve all of the children. It's designed to serve a small number of children, and that's what it does. And I'm not critical because it does what it's designed to do. But here's a problem. If you get a copy of our diocesan newspaper and open it up, there's lots of news about the Catholic schools, lots of pictures and stories. You see these pictures of all of these kids in these beautiful classrooms, look like they're receiving a great education, look like they're having a great time. And things look like they're going well until you think about these numbers. When you think about these numbers, you say to yourself, we're only seeing pictures of 30% of the children. There are no pictures of the 70%. There are no pictures from their schools. There are no pictures from their classrooms. We don't know what they're doing. And if the kids in the Catholic schools are doing Catholic things, it's most likely that the kids not in the Catholic schools are not doing Catholic things. And that should concern us as a Catholic community. And so when I think about education, again, because I worked with wealthy children who had access to good private schooling, my concern is not for the kids who can go to Catholic schools, but for the kids who can't. And I'm not saying that every student who doesn't go to a Catholic school doesn't go because he's poor and can't afford tuition. That's not true. The affordability of tuition isn't the only factor involved in where students end up going to school. In some places, the Catholic schools are not competent. They're not good schools. And this isn't some kind of conspiracy. This is something that the priests will tell parents directly. I've been told directly by Catholic priests not to send children to the Catholic schools because they're not Catholic. So many Catholics are choosing to not use the Catholic schools because it's a public school education with a private school price tag. And many of those parents say to themselves, look, I'm not going to send my child to the Catholic school for $10,000, $12,000 a year tuition so that he can receive communion. We can already receive communion at our local parish. We don't need the school to provide the sacraments. What we want from a school is Catholic culture. We want Catholic learning. We want it to be a faithful culture in the school. We want Catholic teachers. We want Catholic administrators, Catholic curriculum materials. We want a Catholic education. And if the Catholic school is simply doing what the public schools do, there's no way we're going to pay tuition for that when it's already available for free in the public school, if that's what we wanted. And so most of those parents end up homeschooling or just sending kids to the public school. And they say, we're going to supplement their public school education with sending them to faith formation classes or providing religious education at home. And so there's more to this than just the cost, but the cost is significant because when parents are asked to put money on the table, they have to be able to ask what the return of investment is. And if the Catholic schools are just offering public school education with a private school price tag, there's no ROI. And that's a problem. It's just not a prudent decision to pay $150,000 over 12 or 13 years to end up with a diploma that's equivalent to, or an education that's equivalent to a public school education. It just makes no sense. That money can be used for other purposes, like supplementing a public school education or sending the kids to a secular private school where at least the academic standards exceed those of public school standards. So there's lots of reasons. But the bottom line is when we look at these numbers, 70% of Catholic kids are not going to Catholic schools, and that number can be higher because I don't know how many kids in Catholic schools are not Catholic. I'm concerned with that 70% because the current Catholic school arrangement, the current Catholic school model, has no plan for the other 70%. It has no plan. Those kids couldn't go to a Catholic school even if they wanted to. There's no space. There's a limited number of schools, a limited number of spots. And that number is nowhere close to the number of Catholic children. And the schools have their own priorities. I just saw a school in our diocese, building a new sports facility. That doesn't help the 70% that don't even have a core curriculum available in a Catholic context. But that's the problem. It's private school culture, it's public school curriculum, it's large, expensive school model that isn't designed to serve large number of students. Remember, the public school is state-funded. It's got an endless supply of financial resources. The private school, when it imitates the public school, it's always running on a quarter tank. They just never compete unless there's an extraordinary financial situation in a certain area. The private schools just never compete because they don't have that pot of gold to reach into whenever they need more stuff. They're understaffed. They don't have the facilities kept up nice. The culture is just sort of cardboardy. It's a low quality culture because there's just not enough money in private schools to compete with the public schools. So I'm concerned with the 70%. And my desire is not to complain because that's useless. My desire is to ask, how can we build a system? How can we develop a solution that, even if it's small scale at present, which the Academy is, it could scale and serve a large number of students and do so without jacking up tuition, without becoming expensive. And in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we've largely succeeded with that. Our program has so little overhead. It's every aspect of our program has been thought through and arranged so that there is really no overhead. And we break down the work that schools do, and we ask what work do schools do that's really essential? What's the essential work? And we can say, well, the first thing is providing content to study, providing study materials. That's an essential. So we've got to make all of the study materials accessible to the students, and it's got to be very affordable. We can't have teachers choosing a $125 math book and saying, yeah, that's the required text. That it can't work like that. And thankfully, in our generation, we don't have to do that. Not only do we have great, really incredible treasuries of digital study materials, but we also have nonprofit organizations like the OpenStax project at Rice University developing textbook series that are provided for by grants and donations that they make available at no cost in digital format online. Just the latest and the most widely used textbooks in modern subjects like the mathematics and sciences available at no cost. So there's an abundance of study materials available that literally costs students nothing to use. So we can take care of study materials. That's an essential. I then think about, well, what else is essential? Well, assessments are essential. Really, I would even say that assessment is the principal function of a school, of formal schooling, is to provide assessment. Any dum-dum can provide students with books, but assessment takes knowledge. Assessment takes expertise to assess the students' progress. And so we've got to think and ask, well, how can we assess student work? And if you think about tests and exams and quizzes and papers that you had when you were a student yourself, you'll notice that they weren't very efficient. It was normally one teacher creating his own exams, choosing his own questions, and you'd go from one class to another and the exams would be totally different. The different teachers would have different examination methods, different activities, different assessment methods, different grading scales, different grading policies. Everything would be different from class to class. And it would all hang on that faculty member. And faculty turnover is over 30%. So you just see what a wasteful, messy, expensive system that is. So as I thought of my own teaching experience, I said, well, really, what I would like to do as a teacher is I would like to assess the student from a couple different angles with a couple different purposes for those assessments. I'd like to provide students with a simple evaluation of their objective knowledge of the content. I would like to just see if they can answer questions about the content, simple, factual questions. And when you think about that, you say that's the kind of stuff that could easily be handled through a quiz. And it could be an online quiz. It could be a digital quiz. Multiple choice questions, ordering, answer choice questions, fill in the blank questions, true false questions. There's quite a bit of variety in terms of different forms of questions that can be asked of the students. And if the assignments are broken down well, the quizzes can be quite effective. And so I began developing policies for quizzes and exams in the academy that we could publish online and make accessible. And we publish thousands of quizzes and exams that really attack the lesson content. They're timed quizzes. They're of a high number of questions. So even a quiz on an individual lesson may have 50 questions. We really attack the lesson content and quiz the students and quiz the same concept multiple times in multiple ways to really thoroughly challenge them to prove that they know the content. And so we do that through quizzes. But that's only a partial assessment. That's not a perfect assessment, because the other important aspect of assessment, which Aristotle talks about, is that we know that someone knows and understands a subject when they're able to teach it or when they're able to articulate it in their own words. So in addition to multiple choice, fill-in quiz questions, we also want the students to communicate. We want the students to articulate the content of their study and prove, to some degree, the development of their mastery of the lesson content. And so we also, in addition to the quizzes and exams, we provide written assessments. And the assessments ask a number of challenging questions, understanding the context of these assessments, understanding that the kids have access to ChatGPT, they have access to Google, they can, quote unquote, cheat on these written assignments if they're not well conceived. And so we specifically think about the types of questions we ask, the kinds of answers we require of the kids, and make sure that they're of a type that you can't simply paste the question into ChatGPT and then copy and paste the answer, because ChatGPT wouldn't be able to answer the questions, because the questions are specific to our content and our lessons. And so the questions are very carefully designed to force the students to study. And now when we think about these writing assignments, we've already tested the kids quite thoroughly on the objective content through the quizzes. And so we're not primarily concerned with evaluating content knowledge when it's time for written assessments. We're really focusing on their ability to communicate well, their ability to write clearly, practice all of the rules of grammar and composition that they're learning. We want them to learn to articulate and to communicate clearly in written form. And so our criteria for written work is really not objective evaluation of content knowledge. We do that through the quizzes. Our concern with our criteria for the written assessments has to do with the quality of their written responses. So, do they answer all the questions? Do they answer questions with complete sentences? Do they use correct grammar? Do they capitalize correctly? Are they spelling words correctly? Do they provide evidence, support for things that they state in their answers? Are their answers reasonable? Is there anything obviously false in their answers? And so on. We assess the quality of their written responses. And the good thing about this is that work, with careful prompting and instructions as part of a program that we developed ourselves, or I should say I developed myself, we've actually built an extension for our Moodle platform that takes a student's assignment when it's submitted, transmits it to an OpenAI ChatGPT server with a set of instructions for the evaluation of that assignment. And that assignment, when submitted, is immediately graded and immediately provided with feedback, recommended corrections according to our criteria, and is delivered back to the student within seconds after it's submitted. The student literally clicks the submit assignment button, waits a few seconds, and has his assignment graded with feedback, recommending how he can improve his writing, improve the quality of his answers, and so on. So what's great about both parts of our assessment, the quizzes and exams and the written assessments, is that they are all automatically graded, and students are provided with instant scores, instant feedback. And because we don't have to have paid staff members sitting and grading all of this work manually like I did when I was a classroom teacher. Grading was always my biggest obstacle. I went home every weekend with a tote bag 6 inches thick, packed with papers to grade. We can take care of that grading work, the collection of assessment scores, and provide meaningful feedback without any work from a staff member. So there, again, there's no overhead. And because there's no staff member required, we can allow the students to revise and resubmit, retake quizzes as many times as they please. It doesn't affect any of our staff members at all, and it's beneficial to the students, and it costs nothing. So we've provided study materials, quizzes and exams, written assignments, and we haven't spent any money yet. Very minimal. We have obviously administrative expenses to do these things, licenses, things like that, but that has nothing to do with tuition. We're not talking thousands of dollars, we're talking hundreds of dollars that the Academy can pay for the students. So we've got study materials and assessments. Then we come to, the next thing is records. Well, because we have a Moodle system, all of the kids' records are kept automatically, all of their quiz grades, all of their lessons, all of their written grades, everything is recorded, all of their progress is marked and tracked in their online courses. So records are all taken care of at no faculty time or overhead cost at all other than web hosting. So that's no problem. Oh, and then what's the next need? Well, reporting, right? We've got records. We need reports. We need report cards, progress reports, transcripts, and so on. Well, that's all provided by the Moodle site with additional plugins that I've coded to actually draw from the Moodle data and present that information to students and parents in the form of report cards, progress reports, transcripts, and so on. So all of that is also done automatically. Everything from the study materials to the reports is automated and costs nothing. In addition to that, I asked myself, well, how can I evaluate the kids' time? Because if you understand how school credits work, and I'm talking high school level, if you understand how high school credits work, they're really just a unit of time. One high school credit is the equivalent of 120 hours of instructional time or class time. So one credit requires 120 hours of activity time. I developed another extension for Moodle, scripted, coded by me, that provides an estimate of time for all the activities that the kids do in our Moodle system, because Moodle tracks all of the kids' activities. So I created a program that assigns a time value to all different kinds of activities. For example, if a quiz is 10 minutes long, it gets 10 minutes of activity time. An assignment being submitted took at least 15 minutes to complete, so it gets 15 minutes credited for activity time. Opening a lesson gets a minute or two of activity time. All of the interactions that the kids have with the Moodle site, with our study center, those activities are credited with time. And it also keeps sort of an indirect attendance record for the kids, because all of their time, all of their activity time, we call it instructional time, is recorded by this extension. And all of that is also reported and included in the reports. So not only do kids see their grades for a certain subject, they also have on their report the amount of time that has been recorded for their work in that subject, which no schools do anything like this. So if a student takes a Latin course with us, or a couple of Latin courses, which are all lumped together under the Latin subject area, that student will have a grade for Latin for a certain time period, but he'll also have a number of hours of instructional time. And so that instructional time can be used to estimate high school credits and take care of all of that time-based credit reporting as well. So I know that's a lot to think about, but what's important is by the strategic use of technology, we've largely eliminated the cost of education. And I know that people will begin complaining and raising objections and fussing about things, but we've got to compare apples with apples, right? Obviously, and these comparisons, one warning I'd like to give is that the comparisons are never equal. So, for example, I was a very good classroom teacher. My kids did great. They loved our class. The parents loved my classes. I had great relations with my students and so on. Someone could say, well, how can this provide a student with an experience like your students had working with you every day in the classroom? And I would say, well, in some ways, I can see it's inferior. For example, I had great personal relationships, mentoring relationships with my students. And that's obviously not going to be as easy and free as it was when we were in a classroom together. So yes, some aspects of the education are inferior, but there are other aspects which are far superior by the online program. And this is one of the key principles of our program. And it's that if let's say we have a class together and I give a 40-minute lecture on a topic, and the kids sit there in the class and they hear the lecture, and I'm up at the board and I'm writing out things on the board, and they're sitting watching, maybe taking notes, maybe daydreaming, maybe whatever. When I'm finished with that lecture, I have no idea what any of those students knows. I have no idea what they understand. A student could choose to just sit there quiet, and it looks to me like they're doing fine, but they have no idea what's going on. The only way that I know how they're doing is by some kind of assessment, whether I ask them questions, give them a quiz, give them an assignment, or something. And so there's really no academic work done by the students until an assessment is given. Up until that point, I'm doing lots of work as the teacher, but I have no idea if the kids are paying attention. They're not doing any active work. And so I could say one of the problems with classroom instruction, classroom study, is that the teacher works and the students don't. And yet the students get credit for being in class on that day. They get their credit time for being at school that day, but they're not working. And so the credit system becomes an end in itself, and we're no longer evaluating the kids' learning. We're just tracking their time, which is not education. So until we get to an assessment, the students haven't worked yet. And in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, there are just an abundance of assessments, quizzes and written assignments and more quizzes and exams and more written assignments. The students are much more active, or they need to be much more active in our online program than they would need to be in a brick and mortar school. So yeah, relationship issues, definitely a plus for the classroom. Academic activity, definitely a plus online. But there's more to think about, because as I said, that's considering me or considering another one of my colleagues who's a great teacher. There were also terrible teachers in the school. There are bad teachers in a school. There are bad hires in a school. There are teachers who barely make it through their first year before they realize that they're not teachers and they quit. So we can tell the good stories, but as I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned, teacher turnover is usually 30%. So first of all, not all the teachers are good teachers. Not all the relationships, as the news headlines prove, are good relationships. We can't allow schools to present their best teachers who don't represent the faculty and say, this is what you get at school. That's not true. We would have to look at all of the teachers and, like I said, compare apples with apples. And I would argue that the online studies in our program are better than a bad teacher. I would argue that they're better in some ways than a good teacher, and they're inferior in some ways to a good teacher. But for a bad teacher, I would argue that our program is better in both ways. The students avoid those troubles, and they get lots of active study, and they focus on tasks. So we have to make sure we compare apples with apples. Schools love to do that. They love to take their valedictorian and have the valedictorian represent the school as if this is what the school students are like, and everyone knows that that student is an alien, and none of the students are like that student. We would have to sample the whole student body and find an average student and say, well, we'll let the average represent the student body, and things look very differently. Schools love to present all of their successes, most of which have nothing to do with the school anyway. They like to present them as their representatives and hide all of the problem children who are actually proving that the schools don't make the students successful. So it's very misleading when we compare schools. Then we have to factor in time. We have to factor in accessibility. We have to factor in the amount of opportunities students have to study courses that their schools don't and can't offer. And when we make a full list of the pros and cons, there's no doubt that some pros go to the school. But I would argue that as we keep going, more and more pros add up for the online program. Now, some will complain and say, well, but what about friends? What about extracurricular activities and so on? None of those things have to come from the school. That's nonsense. If a student wants, like my daughter is a dancer, she doesn't have to go to a school to be a dancer. She needs to go to a ballet school and take private ballet lessons. That's where you learn ballet. You don't go to school for ballet. Now, she could go dance she could go enroll at school and dance in the variety show and win the variety show, and they can post her video on YouTube and say, oh, look at our students dancing. That has nothing to do with the school. She learns that at her private dance studio. That's the kind of thing, again, that schools do, which is very misleading. They take, I taught a kid who was a goalkeeper on the school soccer team who went on to become a pro soccer player. He was trained by private coaches. He played in private traveling soccer leagues all year round. It had nothing to do with the school. He just showed up on game day, went out there and played and won all state honors. And the school presented him as if he was a representative of the school's ability to develop soccer players, which was just totally false. He was an all-American soccer player wherever he went, or even if he was homeschooled, he would have been an all-American soccer player and went on to college and eventually played in the MLS, maybe still playing. But the schools take credit for these kids. Another student at the school I taught, it was Stephen Curry. I don't think anyone would say that Stephen Curry became Stephen Curry because he went to Charlotte Christian School when I was teaching there. But you get that sort of thing in the schools. I'm not going to claim that because I used to play pickup basketball with Steph Curry after school when he was in high school that I somehow am responsible for his, being one of the best players ever. But that's what schools do, and it's unjust when there are alternatives to schools that offer many benefits, and they get brushed aside with these false comparisons. So anyway, just think about and beware of those false comparisons. We've got to compare apples with apples and be realistic, right? There are no bullies in a homeschool where a student is working online. There's no school fights. There's no talk about sex. There's no introduction to drugs. There's no pressure to go to the party. These are school problems. So let's make sure they're also all on the table. The tuition is non-existent for the online program. It's thousands and thousands of dollars for the private school. Let's make sure all of that's on the table. The private school is only open from 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, 180 days of the year. The online program is open 24/7, 365. Let's make sure all the details are on the table because, again, as a private school teacher and administrator, I don't agree with the people who say that the schools are better. Yeah, if things are ideal, the schools can be better. But for most students in most schools, things are not ideal. So make sure you compare apples with apples. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, what we're developing is a system that really breaks education down into its necessary constituent parts, makes them accessible to students in a very convenient manner, provides them with a broad selection of courses and subjects no school could ever offer, the range of studies that we're able to offer, eliminates the need for teachers, really reduces the work of teachers to support, more like a customer support role, except that the students and parents are the customers, and we're just working to provide them with great support as they study. So we just eliminate the structure, eliminate the crazy, unsustainable overhead, and raise the quality of the academic program. As far as the socializing that I was just talking about, that stuff can be pursued by families in their local communities, in the parish, local sports clubs, rec leagues, fitness centers, swim clubs, dance schools, and so on. All of those resources, all of those activities, they're all available in the community, disconnected from schools. There's no need to go to school to learn to play the saxophone. There's no need to go to school to learn to pitch in baseball. There's no need to go to school to receive mass. Or to attend mass, to receive communion. There's no need to go to school for these things, and we allow schools to like put up this smoke screen of all of these activities that are really not the school's business. And then what the school is actually needed for, its essential work, its academic work, it almost keeps that hidden and shows us results that are not very impressive. And with that in mind, let me just say this. We come to the topic of accreditation, and schools have picked on homeschools for decades over this topic of accreditation. And they've pretended like accreditation is some just, incomparable benefit of private schooling. We're accredited. The school is accredited. Is your homeschool accredited? The Classical Liberal Arts Academy, no matter what anyone wants to say, the Classical Liberal Arts Academy has the best accreditation that there is. We're accredited by Cognia. There was just a big controversy here in Charlotte because the Catholic school chose to no longer maintain its Cognia accreditation, and the parents went berserko. Meanwhile, the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is available online, costs almost nothing, and has Cognia accreditation. So this ability of these schools to blow smoke in everyone's eyes, pretend that their accreditation is some kind of, badge of honor, and then charge $12,000 a year tuition for it, the day's coming where the school is going to have to give an account, because a program like ours is just going to make it look ridiculous. It's going to cost almost nothing. I can see I'm 50 years old. I can see as time goes on, the price of our program getting lower and lower. And I can make it as low as I want to. But our prices are going to get lower and lower, and school tuition is getting higher and higher. And you can just see that the future is coming. And online study, we've all probably had shady experiences with online study because it was all new. But as time goes on, the teachers who are great in the classroom, the school administrators who are great in the school building, they're going to start working in online learning, as I am. And the solutions are going to be great. They're not going to be cheesy and clunky and awkward and confusing. They're going to be very well organized. They're going to be, developed in light of all of the best pedagogical research and principles. They're going to be accredited. They're going to be very effective. The results are going to begin coming in. The scores are going to be better. The outcomes are going to be better. Parents are going to learn how to manage the extracurricular stuff locally and not look to the school for those things. There's going to be a whole new culture that develops in education. And that's what I'm working to develop, because I'm concerned about the 70% of Catholic kids who don't go to Catholic schools, because either the schools are low quality, the schools are not faithful, the schools are too expensive, whatever the reason may be. We're going to knock all of those balls out of the park in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy as it continues to develop with time. And we just continue to make it better and better. And I have the unique set of skills where, I'm an educator, I own the program, I can also do computer programming, I can also do graphic design. I'm sort of a jack of all trades for online learning, and it's allowing us to get this stuff together with almost no overhead. And my needs financially are very low because in God's providence, I've been abundantly provided for. And so I'm able to make this, rather than try to make it a moneymaker or turn it into some cash cow program as other homeschools programs do. They admit that openly if asked. Why are you charging $2,400 for your homeschool program? They'll tell you because that's what other programs charge. Well, I'm not playing that game. My job and my goal is to actually improve education and make it available for all students, make it convenient, make it enjoyable, make it effective, make it productive. And we're doing that. And as parents wrap their minds around what we're doing and are willing to step up to the challenge of learning to do something that's very different, learning a different approach to education, a totally different system of education, they're going to start seeing how many problems it solves. And when that happens, it's going to put a lot of pressure on Catholic schools to either reform or they're going to shut down, because there's just going to no longer be a reason to send your kids to a Catholic school where you get a public school level education and a private school price tag. Just not going to be sustainable anymore. So that's what we're doing in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. We're providing the opportunity for Catholic education, making use of the latest developing technology, and we're doing it at a price point that everyone can easily, a ridiculous price point. And I'm willing to work with families to accept whatever they can afford. So if there's a family who says, I can't afford the prices, and they tell me, I can afford this, or I can't afford anything at the moment, I don't care, because our overhead doesn't change. Our expenses don't change. This program is designed to not only be effective, but to scale. And that's why it's going to work. So having said all of that, if you'd like to actually check out the program, it's the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. It's online at classicalliberarts.com, classicalliberarts.com. And I invite you to go check out the site. There's a free sample student account that you can request access to that allows you to log into the study center, see the courses, poke around, do whatever you want. There's also an extern study program if you just would like access to our study materials to see how things are laid out, or to study within our system, to use the organization of our system to sort of provide some order for your own studies. You can do that for free. Tons and tons of resources. I mean, I've got over 1,000 videos talking about classical education and homeschooling and all this stuff. Tons of resources. And I invite you to wear them out, because I would argue, I'm quite confident that this is the future of education, and it's an exciting future that provides opportunities for lots of kids who, in the past haven't had opportunities, and opportunities for kids who, they've had to deal with some discrimination if they've been homeschooled, things like that. I've seen it. It's really disgusting and false. But I'm hoping that we can turn the tables on that kind of stuff and establish a homeschool culture that's honorable, that puts results on the table, and actually presents a better alternative as its response to the criticism. That's the best form of criticism. So I've said enough. I hope that's helpful. A lot of information in there, but we're thinking about the 70%, those kids who don't attend Catholic schools. We're thinking about the students who don't make it to confirmation and who eventually leave the church. And we'd like to try to reach those kids and give them an opportunity to have a good education with lots of support before they face the temptations that are presented to them. I just posted another talk yesterday relating to that topic of why young adults leave the Catholic Church and what we need to do about it. I recommend, if you're interested in that topic, check out that talk because I think it's helpful, and you'll see how that ties into this, and you'll see that we've really got the beginning of a solution to some of these problems. I know it won't receive support. I know it won't be promoted by the church because they're going to have to try to keep these private schools running, but I think this is a sign of hope of a solution for years to come. Even if it's an emergency solution, at least there's something, because a lot of these kids are not even getting a Catholic education. So I'm going to cut off there because I'm rambling now, but check out the site, send any questions along, and pray for us. Pray for all of these students that God would lead them to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, that they can learn about this opportunity and make use of it. Pray for us as we develop it, that we'd have prudence to be able to find solutions for the problems that we face and find ways to implement those solutions, and that we would be able to do all of this in a way that doesn't raise costs and keeps tuition as low as possible for Catholic families. I appreciate your prayers and hope that's helpful. God bless.